Thanks, man. Oh, can I leave that with you guys? There it is. That's what we were looking for. We were looking for this clicker. Not sure where it was. How are you guys? It's great to see you guys. Derek Bros is amazing, isn't he? Did such a great job. Let's hear it for him. Derek is awesome. And he's also a great journalist as well. He does a lot of writing for us and just does a fantastic job. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. This is my first time at Anarchapulco, and incredibly impressed. Are you guys excited to be here this weekend? It's amazing, isn't it? Hats off to Jeff and to Nathan for all the work they've done to put this together. You know, Derek was mentioning his hair. He's got amazing hair. I get a lot of comments about my hair. I couldn't hear totally back there if you mentioned the alt-right thing. Did you mention it? Yeah. So there's this whole thing on the internet that I'm alt-right because of my haircut, which I'm like, is there an alt-right haircut? Which also leads me to the question, is Macklemore part of the alt-right? Because if you know who I'm talking about, like 3 of you do. And then, but I was like looking at it, trying to figure it out, right? And so then people are like freaking out because there's blonde in it now, and they're like, oh my gosh, he thinks it's Justin Timberlake from the 1990s. So, but then I realized when I saw Truth now, Truth, where are you at? Is he in here? There he is. Can you stand up? So that hair, I think that's what we're going to go with, right? Because that's more of the anarchist haircut, I think. I like it. So we'll talk about that. I am excited to be with you. Let me see. How does this thing work for the PowerPoint? Does it pop up? Somebody said it doesn't work. I guess we'll find out. Do what? What am I supposed to do? Okay. Right? Use the force. Well, let me know when oh, he's gone. Hello. Let me know when it pops up. Anyways, in the meantime, let me just kind of give you guys a rundown a little bit about who I am. So my name is Ben Swann. I am a journalist, 20-some years doing broadcast journalism. Actually started out in my hometown of El Paso, Texas. It's where I first started doing journalism. I started out as a news photographer and then became what they call a one-man band, where you do everything yourself, and then a reporter, and then an anchor, morning anchor, primetime anchor. I actually spent a lot of years working in Mexico, not this kind of Mexico. It was northern Mexico, in the city of Juarez, covering the drug war in the late or early part of the 2000s, and covering the drug war over there. So kind of a cool experience to be here. Obviously, Acapulco has its issues with that as well, and we could go into a lot of discussion about how this all kind of plays out. But spent a lot of years doing that, and then my story is in 2010, my wife said, you need to stop going to Mexico every day and covering narcos and the drug war, because you're going to get killed. And so we ended up moving to Cincinnati, Ohio, which became like the most boring place in the world. When you go from covering the drug war to now city council in Cincinnati, it's pretty depressing. So we moved to Cincinnati, and I started working there for the Fox station. And within about a month of being there, my bosses came to me and said, hey, listen, we need to create a franchise for you. So in local TV markets, they have things called franchises, where basically you get up as an anchor or a journalist, and you have like your reoccurring theme that you do. Well, in my case, they said, we have this segment, we're going to steal it from another station, which is in another city. I won't tell you where they stole it from. But they said, they do this thing, and we want to do it here, and it's called Reality Check. And I said, all right, let me see it. So they showed it to me. Have you seen it? A few people have seen it. So this thing called Reality Check, they said, we want you to do this. And basically I looked at it, and the version that we were watching was basically like Michelle Bachmann Check is what it really was, right? Every episode was about Michelle Bachmann. And so I said, all right, we'll take it and kind of run with it. And fortunately for me, my bosses at the time in that Fox station in Cincinnati didn't know a whole lot about a whole lot. And so they said, just do what you want to do, whatever you want. It's all on you. All right, cool. So I started covering, just kind of typical stuff, and we break into a little more about politics, a little bit about, wars, but it wasn't a whole lot of stuff. And then in 2011, because I was in Ohio, which is like the center of politics in America, right? Because it's the swing state of all swing states. At least that's what Ohio wants to believe about itself. All the candidates come to Ohio all the time, right? When it's election time, they're all there. And so I started covering the candidates, and we're covering the Republican primary, and this is in 2011 for the 2012 presidential election. And I decided for November, hey, you know what I'll do? I'll do this segment and we'll devote, because this thing would air every Tuesday and Thursday, and I'll devote a little bit of time each week to a different Republican candidate, because there were so many of these guys running. And so we did something on Jeb Bush, and we did something on Mitt Romney. No, Jeb wasn't running in 2012, sorry. Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich. We went down the list of all the guys who were running, right? And then we got to the last one, was this guy named Ron Paul. I didn't know who Ron Paul was, other than the fact that he was a congressman from Texas, and I'm from Texas, but Texas is a big place. He was about 900 miles from where I was in Texas, right? So I didn't know much about Ron Paul, except that he was that crazy old guy who would go and run for president, and they would put him at the end of the stage, and he would just kind of say crazy things. That's what I knew about him. I didn't know anything else. So I decided to do a segment. It was called, What's So Wrong with Ron Paul? And said, let's just talk about this guy, and why is it that media doesn't talk about him? So I did a piece. I had about 900 Facebook fans. I went to bed. I woke up the next morning. I had 7,000 Facebook fans. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And there's all these people with black marks over their eyes who start sending me messages saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you talked about Ron Paul. Oh my gosh, you're the only person who ever talks about Ron Paul. And I start messaging back, why are your faces covered? You crazy people? Why are all of your eyes blacked out? And they're like, because there's a media blackout of Ron Paul. There is? Is that true? So started looking at what they were sending me and started watching things more carefully and realized that, again, I'm working for a Fox station. When Fox Network would do the polls, for instance, they would look at the polls in 2012, who's polling the highest, and they would show you number 1, and then number 3, and 4, and 5, and 6. And that number 2 wasn't there, and that was Ron Paul. No, that can't actually be happening. And so the more I looked at it, the more I realized, oh my gosh, there actually is a blackout of Ron Paul. So I just started talking about him and started devoting time to some of his policies. And forget about the man, right? Let's talk about what he believes in. Why is it the Republican Party that talks about, in the United States, that talks about freedom and it talks about individual freedom, doesn't actually believe in individual freedom, right? And the one guy who actually seems to believe in it is the crazy man in the room. So I started covering this guy, and then everything began to just kind of grow from there. We saw that I started learning more about it, and more about what he was about, and then I did a couple podcasts and started exploring this thing called libertarianism. And then I did this podcast with a guy named Adam Kokesh, and it was Adam versus the Man, right? Have you heard of him? Yeah. And he starts, do you remember this? I go on his show, and I didn't know hardly anything about libertarianism, right? And he starts telling me all about libertarianism, and this is what it actually means, and what about this thing, and these ideas. And it was crazy. So it really started me down this road of discovering this idea of individual liberty and what it actually means. It was very transformative for me. Well, then I continued to build up my segment and just really kind of went down this trail of let's talk about all these things that media is not covering. As that happened, our segment grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. We had people in 140 different countries watching on YouTube. A guy in Cincinnati, Ohio, talking about stuff that really, why are they interested in this in Bangladesh? Why do they care about this in Sweden? Why are so many people in Australia messaging me and saying that they're watching this? And it was this idea of liberty and freedom. Well, then, started to learn more about what was going on there. Decided to go ahead, because I started getting a lot of censorship and a lot of crackdown from my bosses who were saying, we don't want you talking about certain issues. And then it all finally blew up because Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan came to Ohio during the 2012 election, and they said, we're willing to be interviewed by your station, because we were a Fox station, and they thought we'd be friendly. So my station manager said, hey, listen, we're going to send you to go interview these guys, but there are 2 requirements. They said, number one, oh, hold on. Number one, the first requirement is, at the time, remember, there was this whole debate about abortion, and Paul Ryan and this guy who was running for Congress or the Senate in Missouri, right? There was this whole debate about it. They said they don't want to talk about abortion, so do not talk about abortion. And number 2, they said, we know who this guy is, and he's always talking about Ron Paul. We're not talking about Ron Paul and his delegates, okay? Those are the 2 requirements. Otherwise, he can't come. So my boss came to me and said, hey, listen, I talked to them. I told them, you're not going to talk about any of those things, and you're good. And I said, why did you tell them I wasn't going to talk about those things? Well, because we don't need to talk about that. And I said, you promised them. I didn't promise them. So I went in and sat down across from them. And there's a guy from the Council, I'm not kidding you about this, a guy from the Council on Foreign Relations is sitting in the room on a sofa behind me for the interview. And they put down a tape recorder on the floor in front of me in order to let me know, we're listening to everything you say. That's fine. I'm listening to everything you say. That's why we're recording this. So we sit down. I'm going to do this interview. And the first question I asked about, let's talk about the abortion issue. Oh, okay. And to their credit, they were very smooth on camera and just kind of, well, you know, give the politicians answers. And they talked about that. And we went through the whole interview. And at the end of the interview, hey, listen, before we go, I've got to ask you guys, you know, you're going into the convention next week. It's going to be great. The only problem is you have all these Republican delegates who are being stripped of their credentials because they don't like Mitt Romney. And these are duly elected Republican delegates. And so we went into this question, and they went ahead and answered the question. They looked at each other and laughed. Well, you know, we think we have enough. I think you have enough, too. That's why I'm wondering why you're doing this. So anyways, the point of me telling you the story is, interview's over. I spent the next week just grilling them and destroying them on air. And so much so that by Friday of that week, we get a call from the Obama campaign. They say, President Obama's going to be in Ohio, and we want Ben Swann to interview him. Oh, that's awesome. That's fantastic. So you got to go to Toledo to do it. So we drive to Toledo, Ohio, and the president's there. And if you've ever heard President Obama speak, former President Obama, amazing speaker, great speaker, and just very moving in how he addresses people. Whether you like him or don't like him, there's a real skill, real gift there. So we're waiting for him to come out and speak, and they put us in this room. You get 5 minutes with him. Now, the way this works is you get 5 minutes to interview the president, and so you get as many questions in as you can. Now, with Obama, he's a filibuster, right? So he'll actually sit there, and if you get 2 questions in 5 minutes, you're lucky, because he just drones on and on and on. It's a way of preventing you from asking uncomfortable things. Typically, they ask you to submit your questions in advance, but they hadn't asked for that. So when I get there, this lady comes up to me, and she's super friendly. Hi, how you doing? And I was like, I'm doing great. And she's like, I want you to know something. I'm in charge of the state, whatever it was, campaign for Ohio, and I picked you. And I said, you picked me? Why'd you pick me? And she says, well, because I saw your interview with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, and you destroyed them. All right? And she says, and I knew when the president comes to Ohio, you're the man to interview him. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I want you to know, normally we would ask for questions in advance. You can ask anything you want. I will. Thank you. So we went into the room, and I stood there, and great to meet you, Mr. President, and let's begin. Let me know when you're rolling. We're rolling. Okay. First question out the gate. Let's talk about drone strikes, right? I want to know about this. And let's talk about this U.S. citizen by the name of Anwar al-Awlaki, who was not afforded any constitutional due process, and yet you, under this kill list and secret assassination program, killed him. And I got 5 questions in 5 minutes because he had no answers for them, right? The interview actually went 7.5 minutes because at the end of the 5th question, and I'm not kidding you about this, while interviewing him, get to the last question, let's talk about Afghanistan, because you say we're leaving Afghanistan, but you just sent 10,000 more troops there, right? The vein under his eye starts throbbing. And he starts to answer, and then he turns it into, we've created more jobs in Ohio. We have cars coming back to Ohio. And it was like the prepared talking points, and he goes to the list. So he took this piece and put it together, and it just blew up, right? Everybody's watching it on the left and on the right. On the right, they're like, yeah, because we hate Obama. And on the left, they're like, oh, yeah, because we hate Gitmo. And so people, for their own political reasons, promoted this thing. And it went crazy. It went huge. The problem was my bosses at the time looked at it, and they said, what are you doing? Why didn't you ask him about the bridge in Cincinnati? Why didn't you ask him about, and like they went down the list of all the things. And literally they said this to me, nobody cares about some guy who got killed by a drone. Nobody cares about the war in Afghanistan. These are the things they were saying. So we got into a big argument about it, decided to leave, and I left and started something called the Truth in Media Project, launched it in 2013. It was online, it was about creating short videos and great content. Did that for 2.5 years, and then got a call to go to Atlanta, to the CBS station there. And I told my wife at the time, I said, I'm not going to go to this place because they're going to want me to shut everything down. It's going to be a mess. I'm not going to do it. She said, well, go hear him out. So we went, interviewed in Atlanta, and they said, no, you don't have to shut anything down. We'll keep it all up. We'll do it. Great. So I went ahead and took the job. went to Atlanta, and we restarted Reality Check there. And what was amazing about when we got to Atlanta is that in Cincinnati, YouTube was our primary source of distribution. But when we got to Atlanta, by that time, Facebook had really built up Facebook video. And for us, that was an amazing platform to be able to spread content. In 2016, we did 110 million video views on Facebook alone. This thing was going crazy. We were hitting videos that overnight, 1 million views, 3 million views, because we're talking about things that other media wouldn't talk about. Talking about the war in Syria, talking about cannabis, talking about individual rights, this idea of talking about breaking through, I should say, the left-right paradigm in media, which, by the way, is fake. It is not a real paradigm. It is a fake paradigm. It is a fake paradigm in media that media uses in order to put you into a camp. You're either in this group or you're in this group, and we're going to tell you what to think, and we're going to tell you who to not like, right, who to not agree with. It's all completely manufactured. But we would talk about these issues, and we saw enormous success. And then something amazing happened. In January of 2016, started to realize that things were going to be a little bit different because, things were going to be a little bit different because all of a sudden, we had so much enthusiasm, so much interest from so many people watching us around the world and in the United States, and so much sharing of content, that we started doing some stories on Syria and what was happening in Syria, and the lie that media was telling you, whether they were on the right or the left, they were agreeing with each other finally on one giant lie, right? Which was that Syria was a country that has to be overthrown, Assad has to be removed from power, we have to create democracy there, all these lies that are told. And then the biggest lie, which was that the freedom fighters in Syria were actually Syrian freedom fighters, which they are not. They're Al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters. And we can get into all the details on that later, but the point is, I went through a series of reports showing how these were all lies. And what happened was, not only did we get lots and lots of positive attention from people watching, but for the first time, we started getting a lot of attention from other media that was very negative. And so they started attacking the stories, and this isn't true. And I would just say, prove me wrong. Show me where I'm wrong. No, and it became a smear contest. A lot of smearing, a lot of negative things. And then at the end of January, did a piece about a story you guys may have heard of called Pizzagate. For the record, Pizzagate's not my theory. I didn't create it. We just did a piece on it, explaining it. It was one of the most talked about things on the entire internet. We did a piece on it, and then the whole thing became a mess. I'm actually going to do a video that explains to you guys exactly what happened. But suffice to say, for the sake of time here, the CBS station that I was working for turned around and basically shut everything down. Even though we had a contract, though we had agreement, contracts are only good for nothing. And so we found ourselves in a really tough spot. And so for a year, things were closed down and quiet. Now, I'm going to talk to you about coming back in a minute, but before we do that, I want to talk to you about the biggest problem that we have in media, the biggest problem, especially for American media, because it is this idea, remember I told you the left-right paradigm is a lie. In reality, can we put this back up? Are we able to go back to it? Okay. Let me see if I did it right. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. It's fascism. And I want to give you guys just a few minutes to talk about this because I think this is a really important concept. If you're going to break through the ideology that tells you that there is a left-right paradigm and that's not real, then what is real? What is actually there? And the truth is, especially in American media, we have what I would call a fascist system that's in place. And hear me out when I say this, because in order to have this conversation, we have to establish, because words matter, and words mean something, we've got to establish what this means. So the fascist system, those who are in power hate the idea of capitalism, they hate the idea of free markets, media hates those ideas. They're very anti those things. They want to maintain their current fascist system. So what exactly is fascism? All right? This little clicker is tricky. So what fascism is not, that's the first thing we got to talk about. It's not alt-right haircuts, to start with. It's not Nazism. Fascism is not Nazism. Nazis were fascists. But fascism is not Nazism. It is not white supremacy. It is not white nationalism. So the problem that we have when we use words, because again, words mean something. They have meaning and they matter. When we use the word fascist, it's kind of a meaningless word. In fact, George Orwell, if we can go back to that, let me show you guys. George Orwell said this in 1946. He said, the word fascism is almost entirely meaningless. There are people who recklessly fling the word fascist in every single direction, and they attach at any rate an emotional significance to it. By fascism, they mean, roughly speaking, something cruel, unscrupulous, arrogant, anti-liberal, and anti-working class. Except for the relatively small number of fascist sympathizers, almost any English person would accept bully as a synonym for fascist. How many of you agree that that 1946 description is still pretty accurate today, right? I think it is. It's a very accurate description because people don't understand what the fascist system is. Therefore, if you don't understand what the fascist system is and fascism is, then you use the word fascist as just a substitute for anything that you don't like. So, fascism. If we're going to get a definition, you go to this guy, Benito Mussolini, the father of fascism, the guy who actually established the word because he took it from the ancient Roman senators would carry around these bundles of sticks with an axe head in them. It was called the fascists or the faces, and he used this word to describe his own personal view of what government and business and individuals should compromise in terms of his political ideology, all right? And so he says fascism should rightly be called corporatism, as it is the merger of corporate and government power. Now, you guys, how many of you have seen that quote before? If you have seen it before, it's because you probably saw a documentary called From Freedom to Fascism, which talks about fascism as being the kind of alliance between corporations and government, right? And that's what a lot of people believe fascism is. It is not. It's not what fascism is. That's a misunderstanding of what fascism is and what the ideology surrounding it is. And again, these aren't my words. This comes from Benito Mussolini, the father of fascism. He says that you could rightly call it corporatism, but he's not talking about corporations as in Apple or McDonald's. He's talking about something else. In fact, the word, if you go back to what he would use, this thing's so tricky, is corporativismo. That is the word that he would use to describe corporatism, which today we translate poorly into a corporation or a business entity. But it's not. Corporativismo is the definition of something else, and I'm going to show you what it is. It's actually this. Again, from the Doctrine of Fascism, written in 1932, Mussolini said this. He said, in the fascist state, the individual is not suppressed, but rather multiplied. Just as in a regiment, a soldier is not weakened, but multiplied by the number of his comrades. The fascist state organizes the nation, but it leaves sufficient scope to individuals. It has limited, I love this part, it has limited useless or harmful liberties and has preserved those that are essential. But, and here's the caveat, it cannot be the individual who decides in this manner, but only the state. But only the state. What Mussolini was describing is not corporatism or corporativismo, is not the corporations working with the government, like some of us would like to believe. It is actually the collective. It's all of us and the government. The collective good, along with government power to be the force behind it, is corporativismo. That is the definition of fascism. That is what fascism is actually all about. And again, if you go back to that definition, it's so important to understand that they say there is a measure of freedom and individual liberty that is given to you as the individual. But there's also useless liberty, and there's harmful freedom. And so it's up to the state to protect you from it, and not even you from it. If you say, hey, listen, I've got a child who has epilepsy, and by giving that child CBD oil or THCA or THC oil, that child is remarkably healthier. And it actually, right? And that's not theory. That child is remarkably healthier. But the government says to you, yeah, but the thing is, too bad. Because we have to protect the collective. We have to protect all of us. And so if your individual child suffers, that's okay. Now, they don't say it's okay. They say, I'm very sorry that your individual child is having 300 seizures a day, But we can't risk this for everyone. That's the very definition of fascism. That says the collective, all of us, are more important than any one of us. But liberty, my friends, is the exact opposite. Liberty says, I am more important than all of you. That's true. Now you can hear that and say, that guy's an asshole. He just said that he's more important than all of us, but I am. And you, sir, are more important than all of us. And you are more important than all of us. Because you are all of us. The moment you take that one individual and you remove them and say, well, they're not important, but the collective is, then guess what? There is no collective. The collective are only individuals, right? You can clap for that. The collective are only individuals. And when you rob the individual of their rights, you're actually robbing the collective of their rights. But that's the very definition of fascism. So, we'll go back here. So collectivism, again, just real quick. So things like the drug war and militarization of police and vaccines and the Patriot Act and drone strikes and cryptocurrency. I know we're in Mexico. And you say, well, that's kind of political, sir. It is kind of political, but it's all political. Every infringement into my rights as an individual, into my freedoms as an individual, is political. But it's not because I make it political. It's because the system makes it political. And the system says, hey, listen, here's the thing. I don't like what this individual is doing. So what we have to do is we have to make him the enemy of the collective in order to be able to demonize that person and talk about preserving the collective. That's what happens. So how does crypto play into all this? So let's talk about this. So left-right battle in media, right? If we talk about media, the left-right battle, again, as I told you, is fake. But it's really, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to talk about which set of ideologies will rule over you, the left side or the right side, but it's really all the same. There's no room for dissension in the corporativismo media because the greatest purveyors of this lie about there is no individual right, there is no individual freedom, the greatest purveyors of that are the media. The media is the face of corporativismo. They're the face of fascism in America and around the world. Because the media will tell you that, well, this particular case isn't important because collectively, right, we have to look out for the greater good. And everything on that list that I have right there, and there's so many more, but everything, let's see if I did it the right way. This way. I don't know. On that list is portrayed in media as the right of the collective more important than the right of the individual. Now, how many of you have seen stories in the news, especially lately, about cryptocurrency and the dangers of cryptocurrency for the collective? Have you seen that as the new narrative, right? It's the new narrative that's being pushed by media because originally Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, they were just dumb. They were what weirdos do because they don't play with real money like important people. They're playing with fake money. So they weren't important. Mahatma Gandhi is quoted as saying, no one really knows if he said it or not, but he's quoted with saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. So the ignore you part started early on because all you crypto people were just weird. And then the laugh at you part started with these guys really think this is something. And now we're in the fight you phase, right? And the fight you to determine, number one, whether or not you actually survive, and number two, whether you can be co-opted and taken over. That's the fight that's kind of taking place now. In the beginning, you weren't that important. Now, because you have money, right? You actually have value. And you're actually creating a system that's breaking through current financial systems. Because of that, you are now a threat. You are threatening to the power structures that are in place. And as that, right? And because you are a threat to the power structures that are in place, you have to be dealt with. And the way the media wants to deal with you is to say, well, the whole Bitcoin thing is interesting, and cryptocurrencies are interesting, but they could be dangerous. Why are they dangerous? How many of you saw the story that, well, the stock market, when it recently dipped, it might be because of cryptocurrency? Really? How did that happen? But the story was there. This might be there. And then the story that says, energy is very important to all of us. And all those Bitcoin miners and crypto miners, they're actually sucking up all the energy. It could destroy the earth. Really? That's the concept. I mean, it's laughable. It is laughable. But these are the stories that are being conveyed. And the reason they're being conveyed is because even though we laugh at them, a narrative is being formed. This thing is actually dangerous for the collective. It's the only way media knows how to control a narrative. So the narrative has to become that this thing is risky. Remember early on, cryptocurrency was the outlaw currency. It was only used by hitmen. It was only used by drug dealers. It was only, you say, woo! Okay, it was only, it was only used in the black markets, right? As if U.S. fiat dollars are not used by drug dealers, right? By the way, those are used by the biggest drug dealers in the world called Big Pharma. But not a Big Pharma crowd in here. U.S. dollars have been used by hitmen for a long time also, by the way. So I've heard. I don't know for sure. But the idea that government-issued currency is not used on the black market, but that cryptocurrency is, it's crazy if you think. But the job of the media is for you to not think. The job of the media is to tell you what to believe, to simplify, and to change a narrative, to put this concept in your head, and then to shift things. Now, one of the fascinating things that's also happened in the last couple of days, everybody was like, Bitcoin's dead, the bubble burst, it's all over, the biggest scam in history. Let me tell you something about scams. I just have to say it, because I know a lot of people who are getting into Bitcoin, and they're getting into Dash, digital cash. I love you guys. We'll talk about that in a minute. They're getting into cryptocurrency, right? And then I had a friend, and he texted me the other day, and he says, everything's going down. He's like, my son, he bought Ripple, he bought Litecoin, he bought, what else was it? Ripple, Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash, I think is what he bought. And so he bought into this thing, and he says, and it's all tanking. What do you advise him to do? And I said, nothing. Buy more. Now's a good time. And he wrote back with like a, ha-ha smiley face. Seriously. Buy more, and you should buy some. How about that? And so trying to explain this to him, and it was interesting because there was like this huge fear. Oh, it's dead. It's over. I'm not kidding you guys, and you might have seen this too. Within one day, we went from it's over, the biggest bust in history since the 1637 tulip market. Have you seen those stories? What? There was a tulip market bust in the 1600s? To the next day saying, Bitcoin will be $50,000 by the end of the year. Winklevoss says 300,000 soon. And it was like, wait a minute, somebody must have gone ahead and put their money in, right? Because all of a sudden, CNBC completely changed the way they were talking about it. It was very interesting to see how that played out. Not sure why it played out that way, but it did. But it's interesting to watch the fear and all these tactics that are used, right, to try to control it. When none of those media people who are telling you how bad this crypto thing is, how dangerous it is, can even tell you what the blockchain is. And if they don't understand that, why are you listening to them, right? You're not listening to them, but there's a lot of people out there who are. So, how do we overcome collectivism? How do we overcome corporativismo? Because again, the greatest purveyors are the media. Well, how Dash set me free. It's only been like 2 weeks. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. I was so shocked that my hair turned white. So I told you that a year ago, the station I was working for shut everything down. Ended it all. Said, you're done. No more. And the biggest thing that they did was put an all-out ban, a ban on any social media. Now you got to understand what that looks like, right? We were running, I mentioned to you, 110 million video views on Facebook. On Facebook alone, we had, at the time that it was shut down, a reach of over 100 million people a month. 100 million people. It's crazy. So imagine you got this guy who's putting out stuff every single day and putting out videos twice a week and a reach of 100 million people from one day to the next, and it completely goes dark. Everything was gone. All social media presence, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google+. Nobody uses Google+. That page was dark a long time ago. But everything shut off. Truthinmedia.com shut down. Everything gone. So everybody thought I was dead. The idea was that the Clintons had me killed. They didn't. I'm still alive. But the idea was something terrible was happening. And I understand why people were so confused, because it's like, how are you here one day and doing all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you're gone the next? Well, I was put in a position where I had to make a choice that I think some of you might make. If you wouldn't make that choice, good for you. I made the choice that I made. I got to take care of my family. And I spent a year basically sitting in what felt like exile, saying, man, I have a lot to say to the world. There are a lot of stories that need to be told. I have a platform that's waiting, but I have no ability to be able to reignite all this stuff on my own. And so it's been a year going through that process. It's actually, I think, in many ways, was a very positive thing. So a lot of humility came into my life during that time. Just patience, waiting. And when I shut everything down, I actually put up a post that said, hey, February 1st, 2017, this page is going to go dark. And I said, for those of you who have followed me for a while, I hope that you've come to trust me. Trust me. But I didn't know what I was asking you to trust. I knew I wasn't going to change. I wasn't going to, show up all of a sudden and be a mouthpiece for the collective. But I also knew that I didn't know how anything was ever going to come back. And then in November of 2017, I got into contact I was contacted by two of the guys who work with Dash and with their treasury. And they said, hey, listen, we really think that you should submit a proposal to have Reality Check come back and be sponsored by Dash, and truthinmedia.com come back and be sponsored by Dash. And so we spent a lot of time looking into Dash, and what is it, and how does it work, and how does the treasury work, and all that kind of thing. Was really impressed with it. And then the week leading up to Christmas, it was almost the end of December, because they do their treasury once a month, put together a proposal and submitted it. And some people thought it was an arrogant proposal because it was the largest proposal anybody had ever made to Dash. And there were a couple different people I was talking to when I was trying to get it all together who work with them, and they were very friendly, they were very nice, they were very supportive. And they said, this is not going to happen. So it's too much, it's too quick, there's not enough time, it's not going to happen. And so I kind of set myself for that. That's all right. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It wasn't meant to be. But put together the proposal. We had a week. It was voted on, and we passed by a huge, huge number of votes. Went to my station and said, hey, guys, it's coming back. Now, a year ago when we had this discussion, you basically had me in a position where I had no negotiating power. In fact, I was told this is not a negotiation. But now I do. So I'm going to make you an offer. We can continue to work together. It can be great. And not only that, but I'll even supply content for your digital sites. It'll be a great relationship. And we'll go back to the agreement that we had when I first came here. And their response was, it will never happen. We will never allow you to have any of those things back. Okay. So I thought we were just going to have an amicable split, and then the next thing you know, I get a phone call the next day saying, you're fired. Okay. Great. I'll take that, right? Why not? The thing is, I'm fired from your crappy little station, but what I'm not fired from is the ability to be able to bring this back. So what has happened now in the last it's only been 2 weeks, we can put that back, is that, number one, Dash Digital Cash has become the exclusive sponsor of Reality Check with Ben Swann. That is back. And of truthinmedia.com. And so they brought all of it back with the sponsorship. And if I can just tell you guys, the value of that to me, look, when you make these proposals, the goal was to say, we want to bring it back and we want to do it in the most professional way possible so that we can keep the standards that we were at before. But we're now, 4 episodes? Today is our 4th episode being released. We're 4 episodes into it, and I cannot tell you how meaningful it is to me to be in a position where there is a decentralized, autonomous organization that is supporting the work that I'm doing. Nobody is saying to me, hey, you cannot talk about this. You need to talk about this. You need to ignore this story. Hey, we're not going to deal with it. It's not happening. Somebody actually messaged me the other day and they said, well, if it's a decentralized, autonomous organization, do you really know who these people are? You know what my answer was? No. And I'm so glad. I don't want to know you. I don't. I don't want to know what you believe. I don't want to know how you feel. I don't want to know what stories you think are right and what's wrong. If I'm wrong, if I'm producing content that is disingenuous, if I'm doing something that is incorrect or inaccurate, I want to know. But if you don't like it because it doesn't fit into your paradigm, then keep it to yourself. And the reality is that is the opportunity that Dash has provided. The opportunity to bring back this content and to create it in a way we were never able to create it before. It is so incredible. So, I'm almost out of time. Let me just tell you this. George Orwell, again, said this: freedom is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. That is the goal of what we're trying to do. To be free enough to tell you what you don't want to hear. Because for reporters, and by the way, as jerky as the station I was working for has acted in terms of the management, and it's too bad because there's some good people who were there and some cool people, and I actually really like my boss. But as that's happened, I've had so many journalists just in the last 2 weeks who have contacted me on social media, who work for other TV stations, who say, I'm so happy for you, I wish I was doing the same thing. I wish I had the freedom to be able to do that. There are a lot of journalists out there who want the freedom to be able to talk about stories and to talk about what they see and what they research, and they're just not allowed to do it. They're prevented from doing that. And so freedom means being able to tell people what they don't want to hear, because everything else is public relations. Everything else is you working as a PR machine for some corporation or for some government agency that's telling you, this is the line. Now, push it. Push it. I know it's an aside, but it drives me crazy. So, did you know that I'm actually on the verge of being morbidly obese? Yes. This gives you an idea of how media works. I'm on the verge of being morbidly obese, according to my BMI. The CDC goes around telling people we have an obesity epidemic in America, but what do they base it on? And we would say this every night in our newscasts. You know, the obesity epidemic. And when you say, what are you talking about? It's because of your BMI, your body mass index, which was created in the early 1800s when nobody picked up a weight in their life, right? Nobody bench pressed anything. And so it's based on your height versus your weight, and that calculated score determines whether or not you are obese. Well, so media repeats this every single day without anyone ever saying, really? Because it's not the same standard. That's the kind of thing that we have to break away from, and because the CDC tells us this all the time. And so how do you break free from that? Well, the only way to do that is to be in a position where you can financially not be dependent on entities that will control what you say and how you say it for their own purposes. Last thing I would tell you before I go, Winston Churchill once said this. He said, there are some men and women who find the truth. They stumble over it. But most of them will pick themselves up in a hurry and run off as if nothing ever happened. What I would say to you guys in closing here is that the opportunity of cryptocurrency is more than finance. The opportunity of where we are right now, it's bigger than just saying, we're going to create disruption in the financial sector. No. We're going to create disruption in every sector, in every industry. The threat of blockchain technology, the threat of it is not that people will buy and sell with Dash or Bitcoin or Litecoin. That's not the threat. The threat is that you're going to take the systems that are in place and you're going to plunge your fist into its heart. Remember Mortal Kombat? And you're going to pull that sucker out, beating right here, final kill. and industries will be disrupted because of you and thanks to you. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Ben Swann, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! Are you glad you came? Yeah, boy, I think we could end right now and we'd say it was well worth it.